The reflection in the gilded Rococo mirror didn't lie. Arthur Sterling adjusted his bow tie with trembling fingers, noticing the age spots on his hands. 80 years weighed on his shoulders like an invisible cloak of solitude. His blue eyes, once as piercing as sapphires, now looked like two murky pools adrift in a sea of wrinkles that told stories of closed tech deals, but also of smiles never shared. The echo of his footsteps reverberated through the empty corridors of the Belmont Manor, 3 floors of California redwood, 16 bedrooms, and not a single living soul besides the staff who moved around like silent ghosts, trained to remain invisible. The walls, adorned with famous paintings, seemed to watch him with the same coldness he had always shown to life. In his private second-floor library, a collection of first editions gathered dust, books he had bought to impress but never found time to read. The Carrara marble fireplace, cold for weeks, held only the ashes of moments that could have been cozy but were sacrificed in favor of conference calls and last-minute meetings. In his office, the Golden Gate Bridge glimmered through the panoramic window. His empire, Sterling Enterprises, occupied 10 floors of that steel and glass behemoth. Arthur let his gaze wander over the series of framed photographs on his mahogany desk. Signing his first $1 million contract in 1975, the handshake that sealed the merger of the century in 1989, the 1995 Wired magazine cover proclaiming him the Midas King of Silicon Valley. "More coffee, Mr. Sterling?" Martha's voice, his housekeeper for 30 years, pulled him out of his memories. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the city spread out beyond the bulletproof glass. San Francisco never slept, but he did. He had slept alone for decades in a king-size bed that seemed to grow bigger every night, swallowing him in an ocean of 1,000-thread-count Egyptian sheets. "You'll regret it one day, son," his mother's voice echoed from the past. "You can't cuddle up with money at bedtime." The aroma of premium Colombian coffee filled the air but could not mask the bitter taste of his memories. Arthur closed his eyes, reliving Christmas dinner in 1982. Catherine, his fiancée at the time, returning the sapphire ring after he canceled their honeymoon to close a deal in Singapore. "Your financial reports won't hold your hand in the hospital," were her last words before disappearing through the front door, taking with her Arthur's last chance at building a family. On the wall opposite his desk, a digital screen displayed real-time stock quotes. Green and red numbers danced in a hypnotic choreography that had been his only constant companion for decades. Next to it, a liquid crystal panel showed the hour in 3 different time zones: San Francisco, London, Tokyo, cities where he owned offices but never had time to see beyond the boardrooms. The Patek Philippe watch on his wrist read 7:45 p.m. As on every night for the last 30 years, his personal chef would serve dinner at exactly 8 p.m. Seared ahi tuna on Wednesdays, imported red wine, silverware clinking against French porcelain on a mahogany table fit for 20. 20 empty chairs that seemed to mock his solitude. A drop of coffee dripped down the cup, staining the financial report beneath his hands. Arthur blinked, surprised by the tremor in his own fingers. When was the last time he ate a pizza? The last time he laughed until his stomach hurt? The last time he felt the sun on his face without racing off to a meeting? The last time he hugged someone that wasn't to seal a business deal? In the farthest corner of the office, a mahogany shelf held his achievements. Entrepreneur of the Year trophies, commemorative plaques, framed certificates, and almost hidden among all the bronze and gold, a picture frame, face down. The only photo from his childhood, him and his father fishing on Lake Tahoe, both smiling while holding tiny fish. "The size of the fish doesn't matter, Artie," his father would say, smelling of sunscreen and cheap beer. "What matters is the story you'll tell afterwards." What stories did he have to tell? Mergers and acquisitions don't make good bedtime stories. Dividends don't spark genuine laughter. Shares on the stock market don't warm your heart on cold winter nights. Arthur stood up abruptly, startling Martha as she entered with more coffee. The cup shook on the silver tray, spilling a few drops on the Persian rug. "Cancel my appointments for tomorrow," he ordered, his voice rusty from so much silence. "All of them, sir? But the board meeting, all of them?" Arthur loosened his bow tie, feeling suffocated under the weight of decades of wrong choices. "And bring me casual clothes, the simplest you can find." "Casual clothes?" Martha repeated, perplexed, as though he had asked for an astronaut suit. Arthur walked to the window, gazing at the city lights pulsing like thousands of hearts. His empire of concrete and numbers built on the rubble of missed dinners, forgotten birthdays, and hugs never given. Down there, people were heading home to their families, to lives that mattered more than any bank account. "Yes," he murmured, more to himself than to Martha. "It's time to go catch some small fish." His fingers touched the cold glass of the window, leaving a mark that would soon fade, just like all traces of his existence would one day vanish. What would remain besides a name in golden letters atop a skyscraper? What legacy beyond numbers in a bank account? For the first time in decades, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. The loneliest billionaire in San Francisco was about to break his own routine, and the thought both terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Maybe there was still time to fish a few moments of happiness from the ocean of life, even if they were as small as those tiny fish in Lake Tahoe. Who would have thought that breaking free could begin with something as simple as canceling a board meeting? Arthur picked up the face-down picture frame and set it upright. His father's smile, frozen in time, seemed to approve of his decision. Tomorrow would be a different day. Tomorrow he would fish his own stories. San Francisco looked different at ground level. Arthur walked along the Embarcadero, wearing jeans and a gray sweater that Martha had found buried in his closet. No chauffeur, no armored Mercedes, no tinted glass to protect him. The crisp autumn air stung his face, bringing with it the scent of sea salt and sourdough bread. Executives rushed from one building to another, clutching their smartphones like digital lifelines. Tourists stopped abruptly to take photos, causing small human collisions on the crowded sidewalks. Street vendors shouted their deals in an urban choir Arthur had never truly heard from inside his car. On a corner in the Mission District, the aroma of fresh pizza hit him like a wave of memories. Luigi's Pizza blinked in red neon, a small pizzeria squeezed between two upscale stores. Arthur stopped, peering through the fogged glass at people sharing slices and laughter. That's when he saw her, sitting on the curb, a young woman drawing with colored chalk on the dirty sidewalk. Her brown hair, tangled by the wind, framed a face that had seen better days. Next to her, a small cardboard sign read, "Art for Food. God bless." The drawing was taking shape under her skillful hands, a field of sunflowers beneath a starry sky, reminiscent of Van Gogh. People flowed around her like water around a rock in a river, their eyes glued to their phones or some distant horizon. Arthur stopped, mesmerized by the dance of colored chalk against the gray concrete. The artist, who looked no older than 25, hummed softly as she worked, as if the world around her didn't exist. "That's really beautiful," he said, surprising even himself. She looked up, her honey-colored eyes a stark contrast to the dirt on her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied with a genuine smile. "Do you like Van Gogh?" The question caught him off guard. In his mansion, hanging over the fireplace, was an original by the Dutch painter that he'd bought at an auction, a $3 million acquisition he barely glanced at. "Actually, I have one at home," he answered, feeling immediately foolish for bragging. "Oh, sure," she laughed, returning to her drawing. "And I have a Picasso in my penthouse apartment." Arthur felt his cheeks heat up. "No, It's all right," she interrupted gently. "I just like to imagine that every drawing I make here is an original. It helps pass the time." Something about the way she spoke, without bitterness or self-pity, touched him deeply. The aroma of the pizzeria drew his attention once more. "Would you like something to eat?" She paused her drawing, the yellow chalk suspended in the air. "You don't need to pity me, sir. I'm not homeless by choice, but I'm not a lost cause either." "It's not pity," Arthur replied quickly. "It's been a long time since I've had pizza. And pizza is better when it's shared, right?" The young woman studied him for a moment, as if trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "I'm Abby," she finally said. "Art," he replied, omitting his famous last name. Abby dusted off her torn jeans and stored her chalk in a worn bag. "Actually," she hesitated, "if you really want to help, could you buy a pizza for my grandmother?" Arthur blinked, confused. "Your grandmother?" "She's staying at the Samaritan Shelter on Mission Street," Abby explained, her fingers nervously fiddling with a piece of chalk. "Today is her 75th birthday. She always said Luigi's Pizza was the best in town, but she hasn't had one in years." Arthur felt a strange tug in his chest. "You're telling me you'd rather give your meal to someone else?" Abby shrugged, a gesture that held more dignity than any shareholder meeting Arthur had ever chaired. "Some things are more important than our own hunger," she said simply. The billionaire who had everything but lived alone stared at the homeless young woman who had nothing but thought about making an elderly person happy. The irony didn't escape him. "How about this?" he proposed, feeling a kind of excitement he hadn't felt in years. "We buy 3 pizzas, one for your grandma, one for you, and one for me. And you can tell me how you learned to draw like that." Abby's eyes widened, shining with something between surprise and distrust. "Why?" "Because," Arthur replied, thinking of his father and those tiny fish in Lake Tahoe. "Some stories deserve to be heard." Abby smiled, and in that smile there was more wealth than in all of Arthur's bank accounts. "My grandma will love to meet you," she said, standing up. "She always says angels show up in the most unlikely places." Arthur swallowed hard, thinking of how many angels he himself had ignored over the years, shielded by his bubble of wealth. "I'm no angel," he muttered. "No," Abby agreed, walking with him toward the pizzeria. "You're just a man in an old sweater buying pizza for strangers. Sometimes that's much better than being an angel." The bell above Luigi's door jingled as they entered, and the smell of fresh dough and tomato sauce enveloped them like a hug. Arthur realized that for the first time in decades he wasn't thinking about stocks, meetings, or financial reports. He was only thinking about how many pizza flavors a 75-year-old grandmother might want to try on her birthday. The scent of 3 hot pizzas filled the cold San Francisco air as Arthur and Abby walked down Mission Street. He insisted on carrying the boxes, a gesture that made Abby smile in amusement. "You don't look like someone used to carrying your own things," she observed. Hurried pedestrians flowed around them like a river around stones, some casting curious glances at the unlikely pair. An elderly man in casual but visibly expensive clothes walking alongside a young woman in worn clothing, chalk stains on her hands. So Arthur broke the silence. How does such a talented artist end up drawing on sidewalks? Abby shifted her ragged bag on her shoulder, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Life doesn't always follow the script we plan," she said after a moment. "I was in my 2nd year of fine arts at CCA. Full scholarship." Her voice carried a mixture of pride and sorrow. "But then my grandmother had a stroke." Arthur slowed his pace, feeling the weight of her story starting to unfold. "Evelyn, my grandma, was all I had left. My parents died in an accident when I was 12, and she raised me. Abby kicked an empty can on the sidewalk. Her health insurance didn't cover all the rehabilitation costs. Bills kept piling up. I had to choose between college and her." "And you chose her," Arthur said gently. "I always choose her," Abby corrected, using the present tense. "We sold the apartment to pay medical bills. I managed to get a job at an art gallery, but the pay barely covered the rent of the room we shared. When the gallery shut down during the pandemic..." She shrugged. "Well, here we are." Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. How many Abbeys had he ignored over the years, shielded by his fortress of wealth? How many stories of love and sacrifice went unseen on the streets of his city? "And the sunflowers?" he asked, referring to the drawing she'd been working on when they met. A genuine smile lit up Abby's face. "Evelyn has a Van Gogh book. It's all battered and missing pages, but she treasures it. On her bad days, when physical therapy is harder, I read to her about the colors Van Gogh saw in the world, about how he turned pain into beauty." They stopped at a red light, and Arthur observed Abby out of the corner of his eye. There was a dignity in her posture that adversity had failed to break. "You know what's funny?" she continued, her fingers playing with a piece of chalk in her jacket pocket. "Some people look at me with pity when I'm drawing on the sidewalk, but I've never felt more like an artist than I do now. Van Gogh painted to feed the soul. I draw to feed my grandma. In the end, it's all art, right?" Arthur thought about the original Van Gogh in his mansion, bought as an investment and neglected as mere decor. Where do you? "We sleep at the Samaritan shelter," Abby said, guessing his question. "It's not ideal, but it's safe, and the director lets me teach drawing classes to the kids on Saturdays." Her face lit up. "You should have seen the mural we made last month. 20 little Picassos in the making." A group of executives walked past, some speaking loudly on the phone about stocks and quotes. Arthur recognized the jargon, the urgency, the obsession with numbers. It was like looking in a mirror of his past. "You don't seem bitter," he observed. Abby stopped, turning to face him. "Bitterness is a luxury I can't afford, Mr. Art. Every minute spent being angry is a minute I could use to draw, to make my grandma smile, to teach a child that art is more than pictures in museums." They resumed walking at a slower pace. The sun began to set, painting the skyscrapers in golden hues, reminiscent of the impressionist paintings Arthur collected but never truly appreciated. "Evelyn will love to meet you," Abby said after a few minutes. "She always says she can judge someone's character by how they treat strangers." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. In 80 years, how many strangers had he truly treated as people? "I'm sure your grandma is a very wise woman." "Oh, she is," Abby laughed. "And stubborn, too. You know what she told me yesterday? That she'll still see me graduate in fine arts, that dreams don't have an expiration date." Arthur stopped in his tracks, the hot pizza boxes in his hands, suddenly feeling very light compared to the weight of that revelation. "What about you?" he asked. "Do you still dream of that?" Abby looked at her chalk-stained hands. "I dream of seeing my grandma healthy again. I dream of having a place we can call home. Art? I already have art. It's here," she tapped her own heart. "No one can take that away from me." They turned a corner, and the shelter came into view, a red brick building with a simple cross on the facade. Arthur felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. He, who commanded meetings with the world's most powerful men, suddenly felt anxious about meeting a 75-year-old woman. "You can still back out," Abby teased, noticing his hesitation. Arthur straightened his shoulders. "No," he answered firmly. "Some stories deserve to be heard until the end." Abby smiled, a smile that carried all the hope in the world. "Let's go then. Evelyn always says pizza gets cold, but real friendships only get warmer with time." And so, carrying 3 pizzas and a heart growing lighter by the minute, Arthur Sterling followed Abby into the shelter, realizing that perhaps, just perhaps, he was no longer Silicon Valley's loneliest billionaire. He was simply a man about to share a birthday pizza with 2 strangers who, somehow, no longer felt so strange at all. The taxi pulled up in front of a Victorian mansion in Haight-Ashbury, its shattered windows like blind eyes staring at the deserted street. Arthur got out first, offering his hand to help Abby. The rusted iron gate groaned as they pushed it open. "Are you sure it's safe?" Arthur asked, surveying the peeling facade that had once been white. Wild vines clung to the walls like green serpents, and loose shingles dangled precariously from the roof. "Evelyn is in here," Abby answered, venturing down a path covered with dry leaves. She always chooses abandoned places. Says empty houses need love just as much as people do. The porch steps creaked beneath their feet. Dark stains marked the spots where ornate columns had collapsed, like broken bones in an architectural skeleton. A rocking chair, partially broken, swayed alone in the autumn breeze. Abby pushed open the front door, which gave way without resistance. The interior smelled of mold and forgotten memories. Late afternoon light filtered through dusty windows, creating ghostly patterns on the peeling wallpaper. "Evelyn?" Abby called, her voice echoing through the empty space. "We have company," Arthur observed, fascinated, the details that had survived neglect. A crystal chandelier, now covered in cobwebs, still hung majestically from the high ceiling. The wooden floor, though stained and uneven, revealed intricate patterns that spoke of a past era of grandeur. This way, Abby gestured, guiding him through a hallway. Old portraits left behind by the former residents watched them pass with unchanging gazes. The room they entered had once been a library. Empty shelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling, and a marble fireplace dominated the north wall. In the center of the room, seated in a battered armchair that looked like it had been salvaged from the street, was a thin older woman with gray hair. "Evelyn," Abby smiled. "This is art." The older woman lifted her gaze from a tattered book in her lap. Her eyes, the same honey color as Abby's, shone with a piercing clarity. She wore multiple layers of clothing, all clean but visibly worn, and a purple shawl covered her frail shoulders. "So you're the pizza man," Evelyn said, a soft smile on her wrinkled lips. "Abby told me about you." Arthur felt disarmed by the older woman's direct gaze. There was something about her posture that suggested dignity, not defeat, despite their circumstances. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Evelyn," he replied, noticing how she sat upright in the chair, like a queen on her throne. "Come, have a seat." She gestured to some pillows on the floor. "It's not much, but it's our temporary home." Arthur looked around. A few candles were strategically placed on shelves and on the floor. A folded blanket and a backpack against the wall indicated where they slept. In the fireplace, remnants of paper hinted at attempts to keep warm. But what drew his attention most were the drawings. Dozens of them covered the peeling walls, landscapes, portraits, urban scenes, all signed by Abby. "Abby transformed this place," Evelyn commented, following his gaze. "She says art heals broken walls. I say it heals souls, too." A gust of wind blew through a broken window, causing the candles to flicker. Arthur shivered, thinking of his warm, empty mansion. "How do you—" he began, but Evelyn interrupted gently. "End up here? Life has its own plans, doesn't it?" She adjusted her shawl. "The shelter is crowded this time of year, and Abby needs space to draw." Her eyes glowed with maternal pride. "Besides, there's something special about breathing new life into forgotten places." Abby sat at her grandmother's feet, resting her head on her knees like a child. Evelyn automatically stroked her hair, a gesture speaking of years of mutual love and protection. "Evelyn was telling me about when she was a literature teacher," Abby said. "Before the stroke. 32 years teaching Shakespeare to reluctant teenagers." Evelyn chuckled softly. "You know what's amazing? Even here, without a proper home, I find poetry. Look at these shadows on the walls, the stories these empty corridors hold." Arthur glanced around with new eyes. Through Evelyn's perspective, the decay acquired a melancholic beauty. The cracks on the walls seemed like verses written by time, the broken windows like unfinished stanzas. "You don't seem—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Bitter?" Evelyn offered. "Oh, no. Bitterness is a luxury we can't afford. I prefer to see beauty in the ruins, like Abby with her drawings. I transform abandonment into art in my mind." A comfortable silence fell over them, broken only by the wind whistling through broken windows and the occasional creaking of ancient wood. Arthur felt something shift inside him, as though the ruined mansion's walls were also knocking down the barriers around his heart. There, sitting on the floor of an abandoned house, next to two women who had nothing but each other, yet seemed richer than he was in so many ways, Arthur Sterling began to question everything he had ever valued in his life. Abby had gone to fetch more candles, leaving Arthur and Evelyn alone in the crumbling library. The silence between them was punctuated only by the wind and the occasional groan of old wood. "You have the same eyes as hers," Evelyn said suddenly, studying Arthur's face intently. "Catherine." The name hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. "You knew Catherine?" Evelyn adjusted her purple shawl, a sad smile on her lips. "I was her creative writing professor at Stanford. Catherine Miller, the girl who dreamed of becoming a writer and ended up falling in love with an ambitious young businessman." Arthur felt his hands tremble. "You're that Evelyn? Evelyn Stewart? The same one who used to correct your grammar when you came to pick Catherine up after class?" "The same," she confirmed. "Small world, isn't it? Or maybe it's just destiny having a bit of fun." Memories flooded Arthur's mind. Catherine, with her ever-present notebooks full of poetry. Evelyn, her favorite teacher, who would invite them for tea on Friday afternoons to discuss literature. "Does she still write?" Arthur asked, his voice betraying suppressed emotion. Evelyn leaned forward in her worn armchair. She published 3 novels under a pen name. The last one won a Pulitzer last year. She paused. "You never bothered to find out, did you?" Arthur swallowed hard. "After she gave the ring back." "After you chose a business deal in Singapore over the wedding," Evelyn corrected gently. "Catherine waited for you at the altar for 2 hours, Art. 2 hours in that dress she sewed with her mother. The weight of guilt he had carried for decades felt heavier now. It was an important deal." "They were all important," Evelyn sighed. "Do you know why she loved you so much? Because she saw poetry in you. She saw a man capable of dreaming beyond numbers. But you buried that man under piles of contracts and financial reports." Arthur closed his eyes, remembering the sonnets Catherine used to write for him, the nights they planned their future under the stars, the whispered promises he never fulfilled. "Did she marry again?" he asked, dreading the answer. "No," Evelyn replied. "She said she'd already wasted enough love on a man who loved his empire more than he loved her." Her eyes met his. "But she kept all the letters you wrote. The old ones, back when you could still write about love instead of profits." Silence hung between them, heavy with regret and missed opportunities. "Why didn't she ever look for me?" Arthur asked. "When she lost everything? When she got sick?" Evelyn laughed, a quiet sound with no amusement. "Pride is a funny thing, Art. After seeing what you did to Catherine, I swore never to ask you for anything. Besides," she gestured to Abby's drawings on the walls, "some people prefer to create beauty in poverty rather than live empty in wealth." "Like Catherine," Arthur murmured. "Like Catherine," Evelyn agreed. "You know what she wrote in her last book? Some people build empires of concrete, others build castles of words. The first might touch the sky, but the second can touch souls." Arthur felt tears burn in his eyes. I really did love her." "I know," Evelyn said gently. "That's the real tragedy. You loved her, but you loved success more. Just like you loved art, but turned it into an investment. You loved life, but traded it for mere existence." The wind blew harder, making the candle flames dance. Upstairs, footsteps echoed. Abby was returning. "She doesn't know," Evelyn said quickly, "about you and Catherine, about our past. To her, we're just strangers fate brought together." "Why tell me all this now?" Evelyn leaned in, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "Because I saw something in your eyes today, Art. The same spark Catherine used to see. A chance at redemption, maybe. An opportunity to do things differently." Abby's footsteps grew closer. You have a second chance, Evelyn whispered, not to fix the past, but to live differently now. Abby? She has Catherine's spirit, the same ability to see beauty where others see only ruins. Evelyn? I brought more candles, Abby's voice echoed down the hallway. Arthur discreetly wiped his eyes. You've never told her? About Catherine? Some stories are like these walls, Art, Evelyn replied, gesturing to the decaying mansion. They carry too many scars to be laid bare, but maybe, with the right care, they can be restored. Abby entered the library, her arms full of new candles. Her smile, so much like Catherine's years ago, lit up the space more than any flame could. What were you two talking about? She asked, beginning to distribute candles around the room. Arthur and Evelyn exchanged a look laden with secrets and unspoken promises. About second chances, Evelyn answered gently, and about how sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters. Rain battered the broken windows of the abandoned mansion while Abby lit another candle. Evelyn, wrapped in her faded shawl, clutched a worn book to her chest with the same reverence one might hold a sacred relic. Maybe it's time for you to know the whole truth, Abby, Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. About your mother, about who we really are. Arthur, seated on the dusty floor, felt his heart speed up. Evelyn looked at him for a moment before continuing. Your mother wasn't just an art teacher like I told you, Evelyn began, opening the old book. From inside, she pulled out a yellowed photograph. Catherine Miller was born Catherine Miller, and before she met your father, she was a promising writer. Abby approached carefully, taking the photo. In it, a young woman smiled at the camera, her eyes shining with the same intensity Abby had when she drew. She wore a simple dress and held a book in her hands. She published her first novel at 23, Evelyn continued. It was moderately successful and paid our bills for a while. But then she met James, your father. Abby sat at Evelyn's feet as she had when she was a child, waiting for bedtime stories. How did they meet? Evelyn exchanged a meaningful glance with Arthur before answering. At a literary fair in Carmel by the Sea. James was a photographer covering the event. Catherine was there promoting her book. It was love at first sight. Arthur closed his eyes, feeling the weight of all the words left unsaid. They got married 6 months later, Evelyn continued, her voice faltering. A simple ceremony in the garden of James's parents' house. Catherine wore a blue dress because she said white was too obvious for a writer. And then I was born, Abby said softly. Yes, you were, Evelyn smiled. And your mother. Oh, she blossomed as a writer after that. She said motherhood gave her art new depth. She wrote 2 more books in the first few years of your life. Evelyn pulled more photos from the book. Abby as a baby in her mother's arms, James photographing Catherine in her makeshift studio, the whole family at a picnic in Golden Gate Park. But then that night came, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. October 13th, 10 years ago. They were coming back from a literary fair. On Highway 1. You were with me because you had a fever. Abby hugged her own knees, though she already knew this part of the story. Arthur leaned forward, his face pale. The rain was heavy, Evelyn continued. James was always a careful driver, but the truck lost control on a curve. Catherine. Her voice faltered. They said it was instantaneous, that they didn't suffer. Silence weighed on the abandoned library, broken only by the drum of rain. After that, Evelyn took a deep breath. It was just the 2 of us. I used my retirement savings from teaching to keep us going. The royalties from Catherine's books helped, but then came your stroke, Abby finished, holding her grandmother's hand. 3 years ago. Evelyn nodded. The medical bills? Well, you know the rest. We sold the apartment, your art supplies. But you kept her books, Abby observed. I couldn't give them up, Evelyn admitted. They're all that's left of her. Besides you, of course. You have so much of her in you, Abby. The same talent, the same capacity to see beauty where others see only ruins. Abby picked up another photograph. In it, a pregnant Catherine sat at a small desk, writing. She used to say, Evelyn went on, that art wasn't about creating beauty, but about having eyes to find it, like you do with your sidewalk drawings. Arthur cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Evelyn, there's more, isn't there? Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Yes, she finally said. Catherine. She left something for you, Abby. Something I've kept all these years, waiting for the right moment. From inside the book, Evelyn pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed by time. Abby's name was written on the front in Catherine's elegant handwriting. She wrote it when she found out she was pregnant, Evelyn explained. She made me promise I'd only give it to you when you were ready, when you found your own path in art. Abby held the envelope in trembling hands. Why now? Because, Evelyn looked meaningfully at Arthur, some truths need their proper time to be revealed. And maybe this is that time. The rain intensified outside, and a gust of wind blew out 2 of the candles. Abby held the envelope like it was made of crystal. There's something else you need to know, Evelyn said gently, about Catherine. And about art. Abby lifted her eyes from the envelope, confused. Arthur felt his heart stop. Before she met your father, Evelyn began, Catherine was engaged to a young businessman who chose a business meeting over the wedding. She looked straight at Arthur. She never completely got over that loss. That's why she always wrote about second chances in her books. Abby turned slowly to Arthur, comprehension dawning in her eyes. You? Yes, Arthur admitted, his voice hoarse. I was that businessman, the man who made the biggest mistake of his life by leaving Catherine Miller waiting at the altar. The silence that followed was deafening. Abby looked from the envelope in her hands to Arthur, then to Evelyn, struggling to process this sudden revelation. So that's why, she whispered. That's why you're here now. Fate has a peculiar sense of humor, Evelyn commented softly. Or perhaps it's just Catherine, still writing our fates from somewhere. Abby stared at the envelope in her hands, then at the drawings on the walls, and finally at Arthur. I think, she said slowly, it's time to read this letter. The rain continued to fall outside, washing away the past, while 3 people bound by love, loss, and redemption prepared to face long-buried truths in a crumbling mansion. The silence that followed Catherine's letter was as heavy as lead in the abandoned library. Arthur folded the paper reverently, his hands trembling slightly. The last rays of daylight shone through the broken windows, casting elongated shadows across the walls covered with Abby's drawings. I need to do something, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't just go back to my old life, knowing you're here. Evelyn straightened in her worn armchair, her face hardening like ancient marble. If you're thinking of giving us money, Art, you can keep your charity. It's not charity, he protested, rising to his feet. His knees cracked, reminding him of his 80 years. It's redemption. Abby watched the exchange in silence, her chalk-stained fingers tracing invisible patterns on the dusty floor. Wind whistled through the window cracks, carrying the smell of oncoming rain. Redemption? Evelyn let out a humorless laugh. You think you can make up for 30 years of absence with your money? That you can erase what you did to Catherine by writing a check? Arthur walked over to the broken window, looking out at the city below. The lights were beginning to come on, like urban stars emerging at twilight. No, he replied softly, but I can try to make a difference now. Catherine wrote in the letter that she believed in second chances, that every story deserves a different ending. His phone vibrated in his pocket, probably his secretary trying to locate him for some important meeting. For the first time in decades, he ignored it completely. "And how do you intend to do that?" Evelyn challenged. "Give us a house? Pay for Abby's college? You think that will clear your conscience?" Abby moved closer to her grandmother, placing a hand on her shoulder. The gesture carried years of mutual protection and shared survival. "Evelyn, no?" "No, Abby." Evelyn cut her off, eyes shining with held-back tears. "He needs to understand. We're not a charity project to ease his guilt. We're not some redemption story for his corporate memoir." Arthur turned, meeting Evelyn's hard gaze. A storm of emotions churned in his chest, all fighting for an outlet. How could he explain that for the first time in half a century he finally felt alive? "Do you have any idea," he began, his voice trembling, "what it's like to wake up every day in an empty mansion, to have everything money can buy and nothing that truly matters?" He ran a hand through his gray hair. "I met Abby by chance today, but maybe it wasn't chance at all. Catherine always said the universe has its own timing." Thunder rumbled in the distance, punctuating his words. Abby stood, lighting more candles as evening shadows crept into the room. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Evelyn asked, her voice softer but still tinged with distrust. Arthur took a deep breath. In his mind, decades of decisions based solely on numbers and profit played out like a black-and-white film. "I want to rent an apartment for you," he began. "No, hear me out. A safe place with heat where Abby can draw without worrying about the rain ruining her work. Where you can properly recover, Evelyn." Abby paused in lighting the candles, her face illuminated by the flickering flame. "And then?" "Then," he continued, feeling words flow from some deep place within, "I want to pay for your studies, Abby. Not as charity, but as an investment. I've seen your drawings. You have your mother's talent. And you," he turned to Evelyn, "deserve proper medical care. Physical therapy, medicine, whatever you need." "And in return?" Evelyn asked, her fingers gripping the worn shawl. Arthur knelt in front of her, ignoring the dust that stained his $2,000 Italian pants. The contrast between his expensive suit and the filthy floor of the abandoned mansion did not escape him. "In return," he said softly, "I ask only for the chance to be part of your lives, not as a savior or benefactor, but as family." The word hung in the air like an unanswered prayer. Outside, the first raindrops began to fall. Evelyn studied Arthur's face for a long moment. In her eyes, decades of memories danced like shadows. "You've changed," she finally said. "The Art I knew would never kneel on a dirty floor. The Art you knew was too busy building an empire to see that he already had a fortune within reach," he answered, feeling tears burn his eyes. Abby approached, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and caution. Around them, her drawings seemed to come to life under the candle's wavering glow. If we accept your help," she began slowly, "it has to be on our terms." Arthur nodded immediately. "Whatever they are. No mansions or excess," she continued, gaining confidence. "A modest but decent apartment. And I want to keep teaching art at the shelter. Those kids, they need me." "And no trying to control our lives," Evelyn added, her voice gentler. "We're not stock options you can manage." "I agree to everything," Arthur said without hesitation. "But I have one request, too." Both women looked at him expectantly as the rain intensified outside, forming a watery curtain on the broken windows. I want to learn," he said simply. "I want you to teach me to see the world as Catherine did, as you do. Through art, through literature, through the humanity I forgot existed." Evelyn glanced at Abby. Years of hardship had taught them to be wary of offers that sounded too good, but they had also taught them to recognize sincerity when they saw it. One week, Evelyn finally proposed. "Spend 1 week with us, living as we live. If, after that, you still want to help, we'll talk." Arthur felt his heart race. It was more than he'd hoped for, less than he wanted, and exactly what he deserved. 1 week, he agreed. Abby stood, taking a piece of chalk. With smooth motions, she began drawing a new sunflower on the wall, larger than the others. "Do you know why I love sunflowers?" she asked as she worked. "Because they begin the day facing east, follow the sun on its journey, and end facing west. But the next morning, no matter how dark the night was, they always find their way back to the light." Arthur watched as the drawing took shape beneath Abby's skillful hands. Like the sunflowers, he had been lost in the darkness of his own ambition, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to find his way back to the light. One last ray of sunlight broke through the clouds before setting, piercing through the broken window and illuminating Abby's unfinished drawing. In that moment, Arthur Sterling understood that he was finally investing in something no amount of money could buy: a chance at redemption. The law firm occupied the entire 30th floor of a San Francisco skyscraper. Arthur adjusted his tie, feeling strangely uncomfortable in his own domain. After spending a week living with Abby and Evelyn in the abandoned mansion, all this luxury around him felt almost obscene. "Mr. Sterling," said David Wilson, his attorney of 3 decades, flipping through a stack of documents, "with all due respect, what you're proposing is risky. Transferring a significant portion of your assets to two strangers." "They're not strangers," Arthur responded firmly. "They're family." "Family you met a week ago," David pointed out, without any documentary proof of that connection. "We need certificates, records—" "Catherine Miller," Arthur interrupted. "Look up her records. Her books, published under the pen name E.B. Maxwell. The Canceled Wedding." "Even so," David sighed, "there are protocols to follow. The board won't approve such a large transfer without solid justification. Your reputation—" "To hell with my reputation!" Arthur slammed his hand on the table, surprising even himself. "I spent 50 years building a reputation based on numbers. Now I want to build a legacy based on something else." The phone rang. It was Abby. Arthur answered immediately, heart pounding. Evelyn had a fall. Her voice quivered. "We're at UCSF Medical Center." Arthur leapt to his feet. "I'm on my way." "Mr. Sterling," David protested, "our meeting." "Family first," Arthur replied, already heading out. "Prepare the documents, David. We'll figure it out." The hospital smell of antiseptic and disinfectant hit him like a wave. Abby stood in the corridor, paler than usual, her chalk-stained hands trembling slightly. What happened? "She tried to climb the stairs by herself," Abby explained, tears in her eyes. "I was teaching an art class at the shelter. I should have been there." "Don't blame yourself." Arthur instinctively hugged her. "Where's the doctor?" As if on cue, a young doctor approached. "Family of Mrs. Stewart?" "Yes," Arthur replied before Abby could explain. "How is she?" "Stable, but concerning. Her previous stroke left sequelae that complicate treatment. She'll need specialized care, intensive physiotherapy." "Cost is no issue," Arthur cut in. The doctor nodded. "There's an excellent rehabilitation center in Napa." "No," Abby said firmly. "I'm not leaving Evelyn." Arthur looked at her, so young and already bearing so much weight. Like Catherine, he thought, always putting others first. "Abby," he said gently, "you need to take care of yourself too. You're pale, you're shaking." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her legs wobbled. Arthur caught her before she fell. "Doctor!" he called, but Abby was already unconscious in his arms. The next few hours were a blur of tests and diagnoses: severe anemia, exhaustion, malnutrition. Abby's body had finally succumbed to months of hardship and stress. Sitting between the 2 hospital beds, Arthur Sterling, Silicon Valley's most powerful billionaire, had never felt so powerless. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The board demanded explanations for his absence. David pressed him about the documents. The press speculated on his whereabouts. "Mr. Sterling," a nurse entered. "There are reporters in the lobby." Something about the CEO of Sterling Enterprises spending hours in a public hospital. Arthur closed his eyes. His corporate world and his new reality were colliding. Evelyn opened her eyes just then. "Art?" Her voice was weak. "I'm here." He took her hand. "Abby?" "In the next room resting," he assured her. "You both need to recover." Evelyn tried to sit up. "I can't stay here. The bill? I've taken care of it." "We don't want your charity," she protested weakly. "It's not charity," Arthur replied, his voice shaking. "It's love. It took me 80 years to learn the difference, but I finally did." A tear slid down Evelyn's wrinkled cheek. "Catherine always said there was kindness in you beneath all that ambition." "Catherine was wiser than all of us," he smiled sadly. "Evelyn, I need your blessing for something." "What?" "I want to transfer a significant portion of my assets into a fund for your care, for Abby's education, for a secure future. But there are legal complications." Evelyn studied him a long moment. "Your shareholders won't approve." "Probably not," he admitted. "I could lose control of the company, everything I've built." "And you're willing to risk that for us?" Arthur looked out the hospital window. Across the street, a giant billboard displayed the Sterling Enterprises logo. His empire, built through decades of hard work and cold decisions. "You know what I realized this week with you?" he finally said. "I spent my entire life building something anyone with money and determination could build. But what you have, love, loyalty, the ability to see beauty even in the worst places, that's rare. That's priceless." Evelyn squeezed his hand weakly. "You really have changed. Thanks to you," he smiled. "So, what do you say? Will you help me convince those arrogant lawyers that family is more important than contracts?" Before Evelyn could answer, they heard a commotion in the hallway. Abby was standing at the door, leaning on an IV stand, pale but determined. "I heard everything," she said, "and I have a better idea." Arthur and Evelyn looked at her, curious. "Instead of giving your money to us," Abby continued slowly, entering the room, "why don't we create a foundation to help other artists like me, other families like ours?" Arthur felt his heart expand. "A foundation?" "The Catherine Miller Foundation," Abby suggested, "for art, literature, and second chances." Evelyn began to cry silently. Arthur stood up, helping Abby sit down. "Your shareholders couldn't object to a social responsibility project," Abby went on, "and we could help so many people." Arthur looked at the two women who had transformed his life in just a week. In their tired faces, he saw the same strength he'd always admired in Catherine, the ability to turn pain into beauty, hardship into opportunity. "The Catherine Miller Foundation," he repeated, savoring the words, "for art, literature, and second chances." "It's perfect." Outside, the sun began to set, bathing the hospital room in golden hues. For a moment, Arthur could have sworn he saw Catherine smiling in the window's reflection, silently approving of the new path he had chosen. Arthur watched Abby teach her art class at the shelter, sitting discreetly at the back of the room. 3 weeks had passed since their hospital stay, and though she was still pale, her eyes shone with that familiar spark as she guided a group of children in drawing. "There's no such thing as a mistake in art," she would say, helping a boy struggling with his sketch. "There's only your unique way of seeing the world." Words Catherine used to say, Arthur recalled. He lowered his gaze to his own drawing, a clumsy attempt to sketch a sunflower. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, trembled as they held crayons. "It's getting better," came a soft voice. Evelyn had approached in her wheelchair, looking stronger after weeks of proper physical therapy. "Still terrible," Arthur chuckled softly. "But you're trying," Evelyn observed. "The art I knew 30 years ago wouldn't have been caught dead drawing with crayons in a shelter." He pondered that as he watched a little girl proudly show her drawing to Abby. In recent weeks, his life had changed in ways he'd never imagined possible. His Belmont Manor, once a mausoleum of solitude, now housed laughter. Abby and Evelyn had agreed to move in under conditions: no excessive staff, no unnecessary extravagance. Dinner was now prepared together, stories shared around the table. Mr. Art called Charlie, one of Abby's youngest students. "Want to see my drawing?" Arthur stood and walked over to the boy. Once he would have worried about dirtying the knees of his Italian suit. Now it never crossed his mind. "Is that a spaceship?" he asked, studying the colorful mass of lines. "It's a garden," Charlie laughed, "like the one Miss Abby said we're going to make on the shelter's roof." Arthur glanced at Abby, who blushed slightly. "It's still just an idea," she said. "I thought a community garden would bring more life to this place." "It's a wonderful idea," Arthur replied, already mentally calculating costs and logistics. But he wasn't merely adding numbers, he was tallying the smiles on faces, like Charlie's. After class, as he helped Abby gather materials, Arthur noticed an envelope from her bag. It was a letter from CCA, still sealed. "You didn't open it?" he observed. Abby bit her lip. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if they don't accept my readmission?" "Then we'll figure something else out," he answered simply. Together. The word hung between them, a promise, a commitment beyond bank balances and legal obligations. Back at the mansion, Arthur found a surprise waiting in his office. Evelyn had organized all the old photos they'd found in the abandoned house, along with newspaper clippings about Catherine and her books. "I thought you'd like to know more about the writer she became," Evelyn explained. Arthur spent hours that night reading literary critiques, interviews, excerpts of novels. Catherine had flourished as an author, even turning the pain of his abandonment into art. In one of her books, he found a dedication that made him cry. "For A.S., who taught me that sometimes we must lose something precious to find our true voice." The next morning, Arthur Sterling, for the first time in 50 years, didn't show up to his company's board meeting. Instead, he was on the roof of the shelter, his hands calloused from digging soil for the new community garden. "You didn't have to do this personally," Abby remarked, watching him work. "You could have hired people." "I had to," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you know why?" Abby shook her head. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that can't be measured in dollars." He paused, looking at his soil-stained hands. "When I signed my first $1 million contract, I felt on top of the world. But planting these seeds with Charlie today, seeing hope in his eyes, that's real wealth." Evelyn approached in her wheelchair, carrying lemonade. "Catherine used to say there are two kinds of people in the world, those who build walls and those who plant gardens." "Which one am I?" Arthur asked, gratefully accepting the glass. "You're learning to be both," Evelyn smiled. "Your walls protect, but now there's room for gardens inside them too." That afternoon, Abby finally mustered the courage to open the letter from CCA. She had been accepted again, with a full scholarship through the newly established Catherine Miller Foundation. "It wasn't you, was it?" she asked Arthur. "The foundation has an independent board," he answered honestly. "Your talent spoke for itself." Abby impulsively hugged him, staining his suit with paint and soil. The Arthur from a month ago would have worried about ruining his clothes. The Arthur now simply returned the hug, feeling richer than ever. That night, alone in his office, Arthur picked up an old photo. Him and Catherine as young dreamers, planning a future that never happened. Next to it, he placed a new one. Him, Abby, and Evelyn in the shelter's garden, genuine smiles on their soil-smudged faces. "You were right, Kate," he murmured to the photo. "Sometimes we have to lose something precious to find our true voice. But if we're lucky, very lucky, the universe gives us a second chance to play the music we stopped hearing." Outside, the moon illuminated the first sprouts of the community garden, and Arthur Sterling, the man who had spent a lifetime building an empire, finally understood that his true legacy would not be measured in skyscrapers or bank accounts, but in smiles, embraces, and poorly drawn sunflowers in crayon. The heart monitor beeped erratically as Evelyn slept. Abby sat beside the bed, her paint-stained fingers entwined with her grandmother's. Arthur watched from the doorway, feeling helpless before life's fragility. It started as a simple cold. Evelyn insisted it was just a minor illness, stubbornly continuing her reading sessions with the shelter kids. But one chilly October morning, she couldn't get up. Pneumonia, the doctor had explained, complicated by her previous stroke and her age. The next 48 hours are critical. Abby hadn't left her grandmother's side since, her art supplies forgotten, her CCA classes temporarily abandoned. Arthur watched her fade alongside Evelyn, sharing every difficult breath, every feverish moment. "You need rest," he said softly, stepping into the room. "I won't leave her," Abby replied, her voice rasping. What if she? Her words died in her throat. Arthur placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble. "She's strong," he tried to reassure her, but the words rang hollow, even to himself. The phone in his pocket vibrated, another message from the board. The Catherine Miller Foundation was stirring controversy among the shareholders. Some threatened lawsuits, alleging misuse of company resources. Arthur deleted the message without reading it in full. Evelyn coughed in her sleep, a harsh sound that seemed to tear her frail chest. Abby instantly leaned forward, adjusting the oxygen mask. "Remember when she found me drawing on the sidewalk?" Abby whispered, tears silently falling. "It was after we sold the apartment. I was so ashamed, but she sat down beside me and started reciting Shakespeare. 'Sweet are the uses of adversity,' she said." Arthur sat on the other side of the bed. She always had the right words. "How am I supposed to go on without her?" Abby asked, her voice cracking. "She's all I have." "No," Arthur replied firmly. "Not anymore." Abby lifted her eyes, finding his gaze through her tears. In that instant, something passed between them, a deeper understanding than any mere bond of blood. The heart monitor wavered, the beeps becoming more erratic. Abby shot to her feet in panic as a medical team rushed in. "Blood pressure's dropping," someone shouted. "Abby," Evelyn murmured, her eyes fluttering open briefly. "My little artist." "I'm here," Abby sobbed, gently pushed back by the nurses. "Please stay with me." Arthur held her as her legs gave out, both of them watching helplessly as the doctors worked. Time felt as slow as cold molasses, every second an eternity of fear. Finally, after what felt like hours, the heart rate stabilized. The lead doctor approached, his face grave. "We managed to stabilize her, but—" He hesitated. "She'll need a more aggressive treatment. There's a new drug, still experimental." "How much?" Arthur asked immediately. "Insurance doesn't cover it. It's extremely expensive, and the odds—" "How much?" Arthur repeated firmly. The doctor named an amount that would have made the old Art hesitate. The new Art didn't blink. "Do it," he ordered. Abby tried to protest. "Art, we can't accept—" "This isn't about money," he interrupted gently. "It's about family." In the hours that followed, Arthur made calls, shifted resources, ignored warnings from his lawyers. The experimental drug was approved and administered. Evelyn fought, her breathing a little stronger with each passing hour. Abby finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep in an uncomfortable chair. Arthur covered her with his coat, remembering how Catherine did the same for her when she was a baby. "You have to stay," he whispered to a sleeping Evelyn. "Not just for Abby. For me, too. I still have so much to learn from you." Outside the hospital window, the sun began to rise. Arthur watched its first golden rays touch Evelyn's face, illuminating her like one of the sunflowers Abby loved to draw. "Mr. Sterling," a nurse entered quietly. "There are reporters in the lobby saying the CEO of Sterling Enterprises is putting the company at risk for—" Well, for strangers. Arthur glanced at Abby asleep, at Evelyn fighting for each breath. Strangers? No. They were his redemption, his second chance, his true fortune. Tell them, he said softly, that the CEO of Sterling Enterprises is exactly where he should be. With his family. The nurse smiled and left. Arthur turned back to Evelyn, noticing a small change in her expression. Her eyes opened slightly. "Art," she whispered. "I'm here." He held her hand. "Take care of her," Evelyn murmured, "the way you should have taken care of Catherine." "I will," he promised. "But so will you. Don't you dare leave us now, Evelyn Stewart. We still have many stories to write." A faint smile touched Evelyn's lips before she drifted back to sleep, her breathing stronger, more stable. Abby stirred in the armchair, murmuring in her sleep. Arthur gazed at the two women who had changed his life, feeling a certainty grow in his chest. No matter the cost in money, reputation, or corporate power, he wouldn't lose this second chance fate had given him. Outside, the city woke to another day, but in that hospital room, something deeper awakened. The understanding that certain riches can't be measured in dollars, and that some investments yield dividends no stock market could ever match. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Evelyn had improved over the past 48 hours, the experimental treatment showing promising results. Abby had finally agreed to go home and rest, leaving Arthur alone with Evelyn for the night shift. "You should go too," Evelyn said gently, her voice still hoarse. "You must have more important things to do." "No," Arthur replied, pulling the chair closer to the bed. "There's nothing more important than this." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. The dim nightlight softened the worry lines on her face, reminding him of the young teacher he'd known so long ago. "You really have changed," she observed. "Thanks to you," he smiled sadly, "though it's too late for many things." Evelyn closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you, Art, something I've carried with me all these years." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. Something in her tone alarmed him. "Catherine," Evelyn began, her voice trembling, "when you left her at the altar." She was pregnant? The world seemed to stop. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. "What?" he whispered. "She found out the week before the wedding," Evelyn continued, silent tears sliding down her lined cheeks. "She wanted to tell you that day. She even bought a tiny pair of baby shoes to surprise you." Arthur rose abruptly, staggering to the window. His reflection in the glass revealed a man devastated, aged decades in seconds. Why didn't she ever tell me?" "Because 3 days after you chose that Singapore deal," Evelyn answered, voice heavy with emotion, "she lost the baby. The stress, the depression. The doctors said it was a miscarriage." Footsteps sounded in the corridor, freezing them both. Abby stood in the doorway, pale as a ghost, several drawings slipping from her hands. "Abby," Evelyn whispered, "how long have you—" "Long enough," Abby's voice shook. "I came back because I forgot my sketchbook, and I heard everything." Arthur took a step toward her, but she pulled away. "No," she said firmly, tears spilling down her cheeks. You're the reason my mother suffered so much. The reason she—" "Abby, please," Evelyn tried to intervene. "Why did you never tell me?" Abby turned to her grandmother. "Why keep this secret all these years?" "Because your mother asked," Evelyn replied gently. "She didn't want you burdened with this story. She wanted you to know only love, not pain." Abby looked at Arthur, her eyes filled with anger and grief. "And now you show up, trying to make amends for what? Guilt? Regret?" "Abby," Arthur took another step closer, "please let me explain." "Explain what?" she shouted. "How you left my mother pregnant for a business meeting. How you chose money over family. How you—" Her voice caught. "How you killed my sister?" "Hope," Evelyn said softly. Your mother planned on calling her Hope. The name seemed to echo in the room, heavy with decades of sorrow and regret. Abby staggered, leaning against the wall. Hope, she repeated, as if testing it. I would have had a sister named Hope. Arthur finally reached Abby, and this time she didn't pull away. He caught her as her knees gave out, both of them sinking to the floor. Forgive me, he wept, holding her close. Please forgive me. I didn't know. I didn't know about the baby, but that's no excuse. I was young, ambitious, and foolish. So foolish. Abby sobbed in his arms, years of unanswered questions finally making sense. Why her mother sometimes stared at the horizon with such sadness. Why there was a tiny pair of baby shoes among her mother's most treasured things. Catherine forgave you, Evelyn said softly from the bed. In the end, she understood that sometimes our greatest losses lead to our greatest lessons. How? Abby asked through her tears. How could she forgive something like that? Because she saw that the pain transformed her into a better writer, a better mother, Evelyn explained. And because she knew that one day this story might need to be told, so the cycle of pain could finally break. Arthur held Abby as though his life depended on it, decades of unshed tears finally finding release. I'm not here out of guilt, he said gently. I'm here because when I saw you on that sidewalk, drawing sunflowers the way your mother used to, it felt like the universe was giving me a second chance, a chance to do it right this time. Abby pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. How can I trust you? How do I know you won't abandon us again when another important meeting comes up? Because I learned the hard way that no empire is worth losing a family, Arthur replied. Because I spent 50 years building a fortune only to discover that the real treasure was what I lost that day. Evelyn reached out from the bed, and Abby took her hand, forming a chain with Arthur. Your mother wrote something in her last book, Evelyn said softly. Forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but choosing a different future. Maybe this is what Hope wanted, that we find each other, that we heal together. Abby glanced at the drawings scattered on the floor, studies of sunflowers always turning toward the light, even on the darkest days. Hope, she whispered again. My sister would have been called Hope. And she lives in every sunflower you draw, Arthur said gently. In every moment we choose love over ambition. In every time we forgive instead of holding a grudge. Dawn was breaking, its first rays pouring through the hospital window, illuminating all three of them. Evelyn in her bed, Arthur and Abby on the floor, a family fractured by the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, finding a way to heal in the present. For Hope, Abby finally said, her voice firm despite the tears. And for second chances. For Hope, Arthur and Evelyn repeated in unison. And somewhere, perhaps, Catherine smiled, seeing that sometimes the most painful stories can have different endings than we imagine, that sometimes forgiveness is only the beginning of a much larger story. Spring arrived in San Francisco, bringing not just flowers, but new beginnings. The shelter's garden, now in full bloom, stood as a silent testament to the transformation of the past year. Evelyn, seated in her wheelchair among the sunflowers Abby had planted, watched Arthur teach a group of children how to build a small greenhouse. It has to be strong enough to protect the seedlings, he explained patiently, so different from the ruthless executive he used to be, like a family protects its own. Evelyn smiled, recalling how much had changed since her hospitalization. Recovery had been slow, not just physically, but emotionally too. The revelation about Hope had ripped open old wounds, but also created space for deeper healing. He's changed, Abby commented, sitting beside her grandmother. Her art supplies were scattered across a makeshift table, sketches of the garden and its visitors capturing the light that now thrived here. We all have, Evelyn replied gently. Sometimes we have to break completely before we can rebuild ourselves the right way. Arthur approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. His expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and simple shirts, his hands now calloused from physical work rather than penning contracts. "How are you feeling?" he asked Evelyn, genuine concern in his voice. "Stronger every day," she smiled. "The doctor said I might try taking a few steps without the wheelchair soon." "We'll celebrate when that happens," Abby suggested, her eyes shining. "Maybe a picnic out here in the garden?" Arthur and Evelyn exchanged a look, one of those looks loaded with unspoken history and uncharted possibilities. "That would be perfect," Arthur replied, accidentally brushing his hand against Evelyn's. The brief but meaningful touch did not escape Abby's notice. Afternoons in the garden had become a ritual for them. Abby sketched, Evelyn read excerpts from Catherine's books, and Arthur learned how to simply be present, to listen, to feel. "I found this today," Evelyn said, pulling an old envelope from her book. A letter Catherine wrote to Hope when she found out she was pregnant. Arthur sat down abruptly, his face going pale. Abby set aside her pencil and moved closer. "Are you sure you want to share that?" Arthur asked softly. Evelyn nodded. "It's time. Catherine, she always knew one day we'd need this to truly heal." With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Catherine's elegant handwriting flowed across the aged paper. "My little Hope, I haven't met you yet, but I already love you more than anything. Your father doesn't know about you yet. I want to surprise him on our wedding day. He may seem too focused on work sometimes, but I know that when he meets you, when he holds your tiny hands, everything will change. I chose your name because that's what you mean to me. Hope. Hope that love can be bigger than ambition, that family can be more precious than fortune." Evelyn's voice broke. Arthur, tears in his eyes, took over reading. "If something goes wrong, if for some reason we can't be together, I want you to know you were loved, fully, unconditionally loved. And maybe one day your father will find his way back, not to me, but to the love you represent." Abby was sobbing silently. Evelyn reached out, holding both her hand and Arthur's. "She knew," Evelyn said softly. Somehow, Catherine knew this moment would come, that one day we'd be here, trying to mend what was broken. Arthur knelt in front of Evelyn's wheelchair, their hands still joined. "I've lost so much time," he whispered. "So many moments." "But we're here now," Evelyn replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And maybe it's not too late for some things." Abby looked between the two of them, noticing something that had been growing for months, a delicate, cautious feeling rising from the ashes of old wounds. I'll go check the seedlings," she said diplomatically, stepping away with a small smile. Left alone among the sunflowers, Arthur and Evelyn allowed themselves a moment of complete vulnerability. "When Catherine left me," Arthur began, "I thought I'd lost my only chance at happiness. Then I lost hope, without even knowing she existed. And now—" "Now?" Evelyn gently encouraged, her eyes locked on his. "Now I realize that sometimes the universe has bigger plans than our fears," he finished, meeting her gaze. "That sometimes we have to lose everything to find something even more precious." Evelyn touched his face gently, feeling the rough texture of his gray stubble. "Catherine would be proud," she whispered, "of the man you've become." "Evelyn," Arthur said, taking a deep breath, "I know this is sudden, and maybe it's too complicated, but something is growing between us, something that scares me and thrills me at the same time." "I feel it too," she admitted quietly. "And yes, it's complicated. We're two older souls, burdened with so much history." "But maybe," Arthur said with a hesitant smile, "that's exactly why it could work. Because now we know what really matters." From across the garden, Abby quietly observed as she drew in her sketchbook. A new sunflower took shape, this one with two blooms on a single stem, bending toward each other to share the same light. Arthur rose slowly, extending his hands toward Evelyn. "Shall we try?" he asked. "A few steps?" Evelyn hesitated only a moment before nodding. With infinite care, he helped her up from the wheelchair. Her first steps were shaky, uncertain, but together they found their balance. "Slowly," he murmured, supporting her. "There's no rush." "No rush at all," she agreed, leaning on him. "We have all the time in the world now." The late afternoon sun bathed the garden in golden light, and the sunflowers seemed to lean toward them, as though giving their silent blessing to this new beginning. Abby walked back over, her eyes wet with tears of joy. "Family," she said simply, joining their embrace. And there, among flowers that always turn to the light, even in the darkest days, three hearts broken by the past found a way to come together, not in spite of their cracks, but through them, stronger and more beautiful, because they had been mended with love. Over the last year, the shelter's garden had become a small paradise. Sunflowers swayed in the spring breeze, their golden faces turned toward the sun like silent witnesses to the transformation that had taken place. Rows of white chairs formed a makeshift aisle, each decorated with ribbons and the children's drawings. Little works of art capturing how love can flourish in the unlikeliest places. At 81 years old, Arthur Sterling stood watching the final touches near a small improvised altar. He nervously adjusted his bow tie, not a high-end designer piece from his old life, but a modest choice Abby had helped him pick out at a local shop. His suit was also new, but unpretentious, reflecting the man he had become. "How are you feeling?" Martha asked, stepping up beside him. Once just his housekeeper, she was now more of a friend. She'd wept upon receiving the wedding invitation, saying she finally saw the real Arthur Sterling emerge after so many decades. "Like a teenager on his first date," he admitted with a nervous smile. "Who would have thought at 81 I'd still feel butterflies in my stomach?" "Love has no age," Martha answered wisely, adjusting the small sunflower on his lapel. "Sometimes we need a whole lifetime to be ready for it." Abby approached, radiant in a sky-blue dress. The past year had been transformative for her, too. Now a promising student at CCA, her artwork was already attracting attention on the local art scene. "It's almost time," she announced, her eyes shining with both amusement and emotion. "Evelyn's just as nervous as you are." "She shouldn't be," Arthur joked, trying to hide his own anxiety. "After all, she's marrying a man much younger than she is. I'm sure I spotted a few white hairs at her temples the other day." Abby laughed, a sound that had become common in their new life, filling previously empty spaces with genuine joy. The small group of guests began to settle into their seats. The children from the shelter, all dressed in new outfits provided by the Catherine Miller Foundation, ran among the chairs, scattering flower petals. In the front row, one particular seat remained empty, except for an old copy of Catherine's book and a pair of baby shoes, never worn, a silent but deeply meaningful homage. The music began, not the traditional wedding march, but What a Wonderful World performed by a small local jazz group. It was Evelyn's choice, who said their story was more about redemption than tradition. And then she appeared. Evelyn walked unaided, a testament to months of intensive physical therapy and her unbreakable determination. Her dress, a deep blue that seemed to capture every shade of the spring sky, floated gently with each step. In her hands, she carried a bouquet of sunflowers intertwined with small wildflowers picked from the garden. Abby guided her down the makeshift aisle, both women smiling through their tears. Arthur felt his heart skip a beat. How was it possible that after 81 years of life, he was only now experiencing its most meaningful moment? "Who would have thought," Evelyn whispered as she reached him, "that after everything we've been through, we'd be here?" "Catherine knew," he replied softly. "She always said love finds a way, even if it takes decades." The ceremony was intimate and deeply moving. Abby read selected passages from Catherine's last book, words that felt like they'd been written specifically for this day. The shelter children performed a song they'd practiced for weeks, a touching rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that left few dry eyes. When it was time for the vows, they weren't grand promises or elaborate declarations, but simple truths born of hearts that had learned the real value of love. "Evelyn," Arthur began, his voice trembling with emotion, "I spent 50 years building an empire of glass and steel, believing it defined me as a man. But you and Abby taught me that a real legacy is built with love, forgiveness, and second chances. I promised to spend every remaining day of my life being the man Hope would be proud to call father, the man Catherine would finally know understood what truly matters, and the man you deserve by your side. I don't have my fortunes anymore. I've given most of it to the foundation, but I have all the love I've saved for a lifetime, waiting for the right moment, for the right person." Evelyn wiped away a tear before beginning her own vows. "Art, when Catherine left us, I thought our story ended in pain and regret. But here we are, writing a new chapter, not in spite of our scars, but because of them. Every line on our faces tells a story of loss, but also of survival. I promise to be your companion on this new journey, your anchor when the past feels heavy, your light when the road looks dark. And I promise we'll always keep pizza on hand, because that's how this redemption story began." Abby handed over the rings, not ostentatious jewelry, but simple gold bands inscribed with just 2 words: "For Hope." The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. After the ceremony, the celebration spread through the garden in a natural, spontaneous rhythm. Simple tables were set among the flower beds, covered with white tablecloths and centerpieces made by the kids, tiny paper and flower sculptures that perfectly captured this unlikely union. But the real centerpiece was on a special table, dozens of pizza boxes from Luigi's, the very place where it all began 1 year ago. It couldn't be any other way, Abby smiled, serving the first slice to the newlyweds. "It's how it all started, right? With a lonely billionaire deciding to share a pizza with a street artist." Arthur looked down at the slice on his plate, remembering that first encounter on the sidewalk. Who would have thought a pizza could change so many lives? The afternoon passed in a relaxed, genuine celebration, so different from the lavish parties Arthur once attended in his former life. Children played among the flower beds, their laughter mixing with gentle music. Abby floated among the guests, sketchbook always in hand, capturing moments that would become precious memories. "I have a special gift for you," she announced when the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She led Arthur and Evelyn to an easel covered by a white cloth. Removing it revealed a painting that left them breathless, a field of sunflowers beneath a starry sky, reminiscent of Van Gogh, but on closer inspection, each petal contained tiny, meticulously painted scenes of their story. The sidewalk where they first met, the hospital where they reconnected, the garden where they healed. And at the center, almost imperceptible at first, the ethereal silhouette of a little girl dancing among the sunflowers, her white dress fluttering in the breeze. "Hope," Evelyn whispered, squeezing Arthur's hand. "She's always with us," Abby said softly. "In every moment of love, in every act of forgiveness, in every new chance life offers us. And now, she'll be in our new home, too." Arthur embraced his new family, feeling a peace no bank account had ever given him. The following week they would move into a new house, not an ostentatious mansion like his old one, but a warm home in Brooklyn with a large yard already filled with newly planted sunflowers. The Catherine Miller Foundation had become a success beyond expectations, providing not only scholarships for young artists, but also support for families in vulnerable situations. Arthur's former corporate empire was now managed by a professional board, while he devoted himself to what really mattered, his family and the foundation's social projects. Later, when most guests had left and the sky was full of stars, the three of them sat on a bench in the garden, sharing the last slice of pizza. "This reminds me of something," Evelyn said, gazing up at the night sky. "What is it?" Arthur and Abby asked in unison. That line Catherine always wrote in her books. Life is like a pizza. Sometimes you have to taste the bitter to truly appreciate the sweet. And in the end, it's better when shared with love. Abby rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder while Arthur held his new wife's hand. On the horizon, the last traces of sunset painted the sky in gold and pink, as if nature itself was celebrating this moment of redemption. "To second chances," Arthur said, raising his glass of lemonade. "To family," Abby added. "To hope," Evelyn finished softly. And there, in the garden that had witnessed so many transformations, three formerly broken hearts celebrated their complete healing, united not by blood alone or by marriage, but by something far deeper. The understanding that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. The next morning, they would begin their new routine. Breakfast together every day, Abby rushing off to her art classes, Evelyn coordinating educational programs for the foundation, and Arthur teaching the shelter kids how to tend a garden. A simple life, but so full of meaning. And every Wednesday, without fail, they would order pizza from Luigi's, not out of necessity, but to remember that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with the simplest gestures. The sunflowers swayed gently in the night breeze, their faces still turned toward where the sun had set, as if they knew that even in darkness the light would return, and with it the hope of new beginnings, the promise of renewed love, and the certainty that it's never too late to write a new chapter.